Alex Shakar's novel, The Savage Girl, proposes an array of interesting questions for us as readers. From the injunction that Chaz, the head of the trendspotting firm, makes to his employees, find the future, bring it back to me. In a similar way, Shakar's novel is offering a sense of futures to the United States and to the world, to cities in general. And those are the kind of questions that we can kind of explore as we work into this novel. Shakar himself published this novel in September 2001, and it's in the same week as the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington occur, and so this novel is really interesting to me as a reader from the standpoint that it kind of marks a distinct historical moment in the United States, a distinct historical shift in the ways that we think about our lives and the spiritual aspects of those lives, as well as the kind of shared common lives that take place within the way we think about products and work and things. So as you read, kind of read with that sense of context that this is a novel that is written in the days and years leading up to September 11th, 2001. And so in what ways does this novel propose a kind of an imagined future from that moment? In what ways did this novel kind of imagine a sense of what city becomes after those attacks? And you can also think in more general terms as in what ways has a different United States emerged from those attacks, a United States that may be very different, or a world that's very different from Shakar's novel, or in what ways has he kind of presaged that world as well. The novel itself is centered in an exploration of marketing culture. Its original title was The Trendspotter's Handbook, and his editor and publishers, encouraged him to change the name to The Savage Girl. And so there's a lot about marketing culture here. And so as you read, kind of think about how marketing culture here has shifted perceptions of identity and space in the years following the September 11th attacks. In what ways does Shakar himself as an author kind of think about how the web's development works here? There are moments where the web kind of comes into the novel. There are moments where the novel works itself away from that kind of world. In what ways has he kind of presaged those things as well? It's the novel itself is set in Chaz's trend shop, which is called Tomorrow Limited. There's a great deal of irony in this novel, a great deal of playfulness in the language, and Tomorrow Limited is one of those things. Chaz, is always trying to figure out what is on the near horizon for marketers. Throughout the novel, one of the tensions that's key is Ursula's fascination with this homeless girl she finds in the park and traveling throughout the city, that she's constantly drawing the Savage Girl. Chaz thinks the Savage Girl is post-ironic from the very beginning, and so he's tries to downplay Ursula's interest in the Savage Girl as a figure that might shape new marketing campaigns, in the beginning at least. There's a sense of collapsing time throughout the novel for these trend spotters, these figures who are trying to figure out what tomorrow's fashions will be, what colors will be important, what kinds of things will people want to buy. Javi, at one point, Ursula will, reflect that one has no time for that anymore. No time. Things are changing too fast. And so in what ways does Shakar's novel kind of understand the inherent speeding up of time that comes with capitalism? That the new phone comes out more quickly each time it's introduced. The new product is always just over the horizon, and there's also a sense in which how does trend spotting itself shape the kinds of things that we want to buy. Javier makes a note at one point that Beauty is the PR campaign of the human soul. So he's always wanting to kind of think about the spiritual aspects of this. That he really buys into the sense that marketing has a role in the way that people think about spiritual identity and their place in the world. One place where marketing culture is really interesting in this novel is in the concept of paradescence, that Chaz argues that at the heart of every product, there's a basic conflict that consumers feel, and so they buy into that inherent conflict. They are trying to purchase that conflict in a way, and he explains this on pages 60 and following through an array of products, and so that's worth taking note of as you read. Also at the core of this novel is a relationship between two sisters, Ursula and Ivy. Ursula is a trend spotter, and Ivy is her sister who's been institutionalized. Now, how Ivy reflects the savage girl, how Ursula reflects Ivy, how the savage girl reflects some version of Ursula that she herself imagines. All the kind of twinning that goes on in this novel is interesting. So you can note how, each of the characters reflects some aspect of the others, or some imagined aspect of the others in their minds. Ivy is defined principally in the novel by her schizophrenia. As Ursula notes when she goes in to visit her early in the novel, her mind will be more like a weather system, and so she always goes with an anticipation that Ivy is going to be carried wherever the moment takes her. In the novel, there's a developing sense that Ivy defines her own place within what she calls the glamour continuum. She is a fashion model who has had a mental breakdown and has been institutionalized for that for her care, but she has this whole kind of mythologized version of her power as a fashion model, and how that fits within a developing world of trend spotters and heroes and anti-heroes, and kind of almost like comic book like identity that emerges there is something that's interesting as Ivy develops as a character here. Ursula's own hesitancies in her work as a trend spotter, her own sense of hesitation as she follows Chaz and develops in her career is an important tension in the novel. Also, her sense of the world as she approaches as an artist. That she is primarily trained as an artist, and so her drawings of the savage girl and her renderings of the world as a whole, in what ways does she try to incorporate the beauty of the world? And so as the novel develops, it's really interesting in what ways you as a reader begin to see the savage girl and her own beauty here as it's reflected from these two sisters, Ursula and Ivy. Is the savage girl kind of almost like a quasi-sister to these girls, or a quasi-twin to these girls as well? Finally, the novel is interesting to me also in terms of its spiritual aspects as well. Javier and Chaz talk about the idea of a light age, where our whole personal mythologies are being consolidated in certain ways, and so the trend spotters are always thinking about how do larger trends in spirit and personal identity, how do those impact the ways in which we look at product. The light age is an ideal world in which we hope to someday live, as they'll reiterate throughout the novel, and so they're looking for the things that are going to be present there. But in the midst of that, Ursula's feeling, that there's a sense of irony that's at work, kind of a hipsterism that she's already kind of noting in the way the world develops. That something's off balance for her here. That may very well be irony. The city is already too cool, or as she'll say, super cool, too cool for itself in some ways. And so, what ways is there a tension between that ideal world that the trend spotters are bringing about and the ironies that Ursula is feeling within herself and within the city? Javier argues back throughout this that products are magical things, that they are fruit of the human imagination, that he wants to argue for those kind of, that idea that the crafted things come out of the identity of the one who crafts them. in what ways do mass-produced things or mass-produced images counteract that in the end? And Javier also notes, that in terms of spirit, that people are feeling nostalgic for a simple moral universe. And you can think about your own connection and feelings in the wake of September 11th, 2001. In what ways did that world emerge, or in what ways has that world been overly simplified, or in what ways has that world not emerged? Has it become even more complex in the end? Ursula's observations leads her to see that the whole city's got this fucking smirk, as she says, right? That it's too cool in the end, that there isn't this kind of simplicity that Javier is arguing for, but instead it's, in a way, kind of a sarcasm that develops among the city's residents. In the city, it's becomes too cool for itself in the end, that there is no light age as things develop from here. So with Trendspotting, we can come back around and think about the ideas and the futures that Shekara's novel anticipates here. In what ways, has the world played itself out in the wake of September 11th, 2001? In what ways has the city changed in response to those attacks? And, in a very kind of prescient moment, Ursula is thinking about how the Savage Girl and the image of the Savage Girl, how it could impact the world in the city in that moment. And as she notes, and the Savage Girl, what changes could she bring about? A kind of guerrilla campaign waged behind enemy lines, as she's thinking about how to undo all the power that's in Chaz's version of the Light Age. The question will be, how does Ursula implant that sense of a spiritual world in the midst of a world that seems highly cynical and drawn by marketers?